Common errors committed in chemistry in the theory papers. It is a part of the presentation of the CBSE webinar or online training session of the capacity building program for school teachers by CBSE resource person Mr. Partha Mitra on 1st April 2021. Chemistry as a subject is considered to be difficult as it involves a lot of understanding with the application of equations, formulae, numericals and more. It seems to be a bit complicated, but with a little effort and consistent hard work, one can easily master this subject. Most of the students know the importance of chemistry marks and put their best effort to grab the perfect score, but still they lose marks as they commit some silliest mistakes while taking the examination. Group 1. Habitual errors committed by all the students while writing answers in chemistry. Error number 1. Use of wrong symbols for the name of the elements. This error is especially observed while writing the symbols of elements either with the Latin name origin or writing wrongly the symbols with a capital letter or a letter in italics in the symbols as P for potassium instead of K, SO for sodium instead of Na. Here the Latin names are written wrongly. Both capital C and capital L for chlorine and capital C and capital O for cobalt. Here the second letter is written in capital, which is again wrong. Sometimes the student write the symbols of the elements with small letter or with italics. Though these mistakes are generally committed by class 10 students, some class 12 students also commit this type of mistake. Error number 2. Writing of wrong chemical formulae. Some examples of errors are like chromium sulfate is written as CrSO4 instead of Cr2SO4 whole twice. Silver chloride as AgCl2 instead of AgCl. Ferric sulfate as FeSO4 instead of Fe2SO4 whole thrice. Potassium ferrocyanide as K3FeCN6 instead of K4FeCN6. Students do commit these errors as they get confused with the signs or names of the radicals used while writing the formula. Error number 3. Writing of unbalanced and incomplete chemical equations. Students should know that for a chemical equation to achieve full marks, the equation must contain correct species, it must be balanced, the equation must contain correct physical states like aqueous or liquid or solid or gas, and if required, the reaction conditions like the catalyst, pressure, temperature, etc. should be mentioned. For example, in the Haber's process, all the conditions need to be written as the conditions like optimum pressure, temperature and as catalyst, and simply writing of the reaction is not sufficient. Error number 4. Drawing of unclear, unlabeled diagrams. It is a good idea to use a diagram as it clarifies an answer. For example, in the questions related to the methods of separation, the students tend to draw or label wrong diagrams. Here, arg is written instead of heat and black ink is written instead of condensate. Students should be clarified about the following points while making them to draw the diagrams. To keep the diagram simple, usually it is best to draw simple two-dimensional schematic diagrams. If a label diagram is asked for, the student must label the critical parts. The labeling line from the label should touch the name part and be horizontal. It should not have any arrowheads unless they are indicating movements. The student should make sure that the diagram and the labels should be done with pencil as mistakes can be easily rubbed out. Here the schematic and the proper diagrams of distillation are shown. Error number 5. Providing multiple answers hoping that one of the answers is correct. Here are some examples. This type of examples are only observed in MCQ type questions. This is another example of similar type of mistakes committed by the students. This type of mistake is commonly done by the students hoping that they can get marks. Students should be made to understand very properly that correct response plus contradiction is equal to 0 marks. So one may get 0 mark by providing multiple answers with the hope that one of the response might be correct. Students should be careful as they are not supposed to provide any information that contradicts worthwhile information written earlier. A contradiction cancels out the marks the students might otherwise have been awarded. Group 2. Common errors committed by Class 10 board examinees. Common errors committed in chemical reactions and equation chapter. Usually, in this chapter, the errors are committed in writing of a chemical equation. Many students make a mistake in writing the stoichiometric coefficient of the chemical equation. Another common error observed in the wrong identification of different types of reactions or wrong identification of oxidizing or reducing agents and oxidized and reduced products in a chemical reaction. All this happens due to conceptual misunderstanding or confusion of concepts among the students. Example of wrong writing of chemical equation. This question has been sourced from CBSE board paper of 2020. In this question, the question was asked, write two observations when lead nitrate is heated in a test tube, name the type of reaction, and write a balanced chemical equation to represent the above reaction. Many students wrote the unbalanced chemical equations and some wrote NO as a product in the reaction. Example of wrong identification of type of reaction. In this MCQ, many students identified the reaction wrongly. The correct answer should be decomposition of calcium carbonate to form quicklime and carbon dioxide. For the question, which of the following reaction is an endothermic reaction? Common mistakes committed in acid, bases and salt chapter. Usually, the errors are committed in distinguishing strong or weak acids or bases and concentrated dilute acid or bases or their effects on dilution. This is a very common mistake done by the students of this grade. In writing the reactions for the preparation of salts and their properties, in writing the reactions of acid and bases, in the identification of products obtained in the hydrolysis reaction, and in distinguishing the nature of substance as deliquescent or hygroscopic substances and their examples. Example of wrong writing of reactions in the preparation of salts and their properties. This question is taken from CBSE board paper 2020. In this, many of the students wrote either reaction or the use of salt wrongly. Example of incorrectly writing the effects of dilution on acids. In this question, many students wrote that the concentration of hydronium ion increases on dilution. Common errors committed in metals and nonmetals chapter. Students usually commit errors in naming the exceptional metals and nonmetals based on their properties, writing of reactions of metals and nonmetals and their compounds with different reagents, in naming the metallurgical processes to be used for the extraction of a particular ore like calcination, roasting, oxidation, reduction, etc. In predicting the reactivity nature of a metal based on its position in the reactivity series. To ensure that the correct reactions are written, it is best for the examinees to memorize the major class of reactions that occur. For example, M plus Hx gives Mx plus H2, where M is the metal and X is the acid radical. Or MCO3 or MHCO3 plus Hx gives Mx plus H2O plus CO2. Example of wrong naming of the metallurgical processes. In this question given in CBSE board paper 2020, some students wrote calcination and oxidation in place of roasting and reduction respectively. Reaction was written wrongly by some examinees. Common errors committed in carbon and its compounds chapter. Students usually commit errors in identification of the organic compounds based on the IUPAC nomenclature and its structures, in writing the general reactions and chemical properties. Example of wrong identification of the organic compounds. This question given in the CBSE board paper of 2019. Many students wrongly identified the compounds A, B, C, D. Some students got confused in writing the products of the reaction. The concept of esterification was not clear to many examinees. Another question taken from board paper of 2020, the question was asked to identify the saturated hydrocarbon, to identify the organic acid and to give its structure formula, and which of this compound when heated at 443 Kelvin in presence of concentrated sulfuric acid forms ethene as a major product, and what is the role played by concentrated sulfuric acid in the reaction. Many students wrote the answer of this question partially wrong. Some identified wrongly ethene as saturated hydrocarbon. Some students drew the structure of ethanoic acid with wrong bonding, and some students named ethanoic acid again for ethene preparation. In this chapter, there is a chain of multiple concepts that are interlinked with each other. If the students miss or misunderstand any one of them, then it is going to cause trouble in answering the questions. So, instead of focusing only on the selected topics, it is recommended to go through all the concepts from nomenclature to the chemical properties. Common errors committed in periodic table and its properties chapter. Usually, the errors are committed in identify the periodic properties and its trends. Most students get confused in the trends of the periodic properties because their focus is on remembering and not on the reasons behind these trends. Identifying the group number, period number, and the valencies by their atomic numbers. Differentiating laws related to the periodic table, like the modern periodic law and the Mendeleev's law. Differentiating between the concept of atomic mass unit and mass number. Example of wrong identification of the group number and valency by the atomic numbers. This question taken from board paper of 2020. Many students wrote the periodic number of the elements wrongly. Some students wrote the names of the elements X as Mg and Y as S and wrote the formulas Mgs instead of XY, which should not be done. Example of confusion in the periodic table. This question taken from CBSE's board paper of 2020. Many students wrote wrong answers as they were confused about the trends in the periodic properties. Some students wrote D as an answer where the correct answer should be C. Other types of errors committed by the students of class 10 in chemistry theory papers. Error committed due to confusion of terms. Errors are committed by the examinees as they get confused with the concepts like different type of bonding, ionization and dissociation, electronegativity and electron affinity, Gay-Lussac's law and Avogadro's law, dehydration, dehydrohalogenation and dehydrogenation, strong electrolyte, non-electrolyte and weak electrolyte, acidity or alkalinity with the pH of the solution, molecular weight and molecular formula, orbital or atomic structure diagram and electron dot or Lewis diagram, roasting and calcination, etc. to name a few. Example of wrong identification of coordinate bond and covalent bond. In this question, the question is asked, state the type of bonding in the following molecules. Some of the errors made by the candidates were, students wrote the answer as coordinate bond instead of covalent bond in case of water, indicating that the candidates got confused with hydronium ion. Some students associated the term covalent bond with calcium oxide instead of ionic bond. Example of confusion in terms dehydration, dehydrohalogenation and dehydrogenation. In this question, several students were confused among these terms. Students should be made to clearly understand that dehydrogenation is a chemical reaction that involves the removal of hydrogen, usually from an organic molecule. It is a reverse of hydrogenation. Dehydration is a chemical process which takes place when alcohols are heated with strong acid catalyst. Most commonly used is sulfuric acid and phosphoric acid. The alcohols typically undergo a 1-2 elimination reaction to generate an alkene and water. Dehydrohalogenation is an elimination reaction that eliminates the hydrogen halide from a substrate. This reaction is usually associated with the synthesis of alkenes. Errors committed in writing of incomplete or wrong inorganic structures. Errors are made in drawing the orbit structure for electron pairs along with the bonds, the lone pair of electrons, the transfer of electrons, and the ion formation. In coordinate bonding, sometimes the overall positive charge is given a miss in case of ammonium or hydronium ions. Errors committed in naming of the inorganic compounds. One example to cite with. In case of electroplating with silver, candidates incorrectly name the electrolyte as silver argentocyanide instead of sodium argentocyanide or silver nitrate. Examples of error committed in writing of the structures. In this question of drawing of the electron dot diagram of the nitrogen molecule, sodium chloride and ammonium ion, many students committed the following errors like candidates drew the orbit structure and showed the electron pairs along with the bonds. Some forgot to draw the lone pair of electrons of nitrogen. Electrons of sodium were not differently represented from chlorine. Transfer of electrons and ion formation was not shown. A few candidates drew the orbital diagram instead of the electron dot diagram. Coordinate bond was not shown by some candidates. Overall positive charge was not shown on the ion in few cases. Some drew the structure of ammonia instead of ammonium ion. Error committed in writing of complete organic structure. Some students mistakenly do not complete the structure of an organic compound with adequate number of hydrogen atoms. Errors are made usually in the structures of aldehyde and alcohol. For example, diethyl ether is mostly confused with acetone or ketone. Wrong writing of iodomethane as CH4I instead of CH3I. Error committed in writing of observation based on practical chemistry. Some of the common errors observed in this case of the color of the precipitate formed, nature of the substance based on its solubility, the nature of the gas evolved, etc. For example, students usually get confused with the color of the precipitate of ferric and ferrous salts. Error committed in writing of observation when the reaction is asked for and vice versa. For example, when the question is asked about the observation of esterification reaction, many candidates write the equation or name the products. Errors committed in writing of names, reactions and conditions of the processes. Students get confused and write the names incorrectly in case of the questions based on Ostwald process, Bayer's process, Haber's process or contact process. Also, errors are committed in writing the names of the catalyst used and other conditions required. Errors committed in the mole concept and stoichiometry. Errors are made mostly in the conversion of molecular formula to empirical formula. Also, the misconception between the number of gram atoms and number of atoms among the students end up in wrong calculation and answer. Errors in calculation like the relative molecular mass of copper sulfate pentahydrate wherein 5 molecules of water may be calculated as 5 into 2 plus 16 instead of 2 plus 16 whole multiplied by 5. Error committed in writing of wrong components of alloys and their application. For example, in writing of brass and bronze composition, students usually make mistake as we know that in brass, copper is 60% and zinc is 40%, and in bronze, copper is 90%, zinc is 10%. Students may be asked to remember it with a jingle, जिसमें N है, उसमें tin है. Group 3. Common errors committed by Class 12 board examinees. Often the students are so anxious while writing the examination that they commit mistakes in all the three sections of chemistry paper under the classifications of physical chemistry, inorganic chemistry and organic chemistry, and most of the students do it without realizing their mistakes. The errors committed by the students have nothing to do with their subject knowledge. However, these mistakes can be easily avoided with few precautions. Common errors committed in physical chemistry. Error number 1. In a numerical based question, half mark or 1 mark each is assigned to writing the working formula, posting data or substituting values in the working formula, perfect numerical value, and use of proper unit. Common mistakes made by the students are they do not write the working formula. Sometimes the students copy the data given in the question paper incorrectly, especially in the numerical question, and then solve the question resulting in the wrong answer, which will ultimately lead to the zero score in that question, though they had done the whole procedure and calculations correctly. They do not post the data or substitute value in the working formula. Calculation errors when doing problems. The students do not check the compatibility of all the units. That is, all units of each data should be either in SI or CGS units. Students also tend to make mistakes of writing the numerical values and the final answer without proper units. Examples of errors in numerical problems. In this question given, to calculate the boiling point of the urea solution when 6 grams of urea is dissolved in 200 grams of water, several candidates got the answer of the boiling point of urea as 372.74 Kelvin instead of 373.26 Kelvin, as in place of adding the boiling point elevation to the boiling point of the solvent, the students subtracted the value of boiling point elevation. Some students noted down the value of ebullioscopic constant wrongly. In this example number 2, taken from the CBSE Class 12 Board paper of 2020, some examinees wrote the formula incorrectly, some did the calculation mistakes as usual, few students copied the value of the log incorrectly, and some did not mention years at last. Error number 2. Errors of incorrect rounding of the digits and significant figure rule. It is generally observed that students either do not use correct significant figures conversion or they round off all the figures given in the question. This leads to wrong answer and they lose marks. It should be clarified to the students that during solving the numerical, all the figures need not be rounded off, rather, only the final answer should be rounded off to requisite number of significant figures. Error number 3. In the questions based on generalized laws, students usually rephrase the statements or only write the mathematical expression. However, students need to be aware of the fact that marks are only allotted to the statement of the law. Bottom line is that all the laws should be written as it was stated, and in definition based question sometimes students get confused and write the wrong definitions. Examples of writing wrong definitions. The question was asked to define peptidation, electrophoresis and diuresis. Most of the students did not write the correct definition of peptidation. They either wrote the definition for coagulation or peptide linkage. Many students did not write the correct example. Majority of the candidates explained and defined electrophoresis as electrolysis. Several candidates, instead of mentioning the movement of colloidal particles, mentioned charge separation. Many candidates did not give the correct examples. Several candidates did not mention the removal of dissolved impurities, crystalloids from colloids through the semi-permeable membrane. Some candidates wrote incorrect examples. Error number 4. In graph-based questions, students often plot the graph but they forget to write the variables, which results in losing of marks. Both the independent and dependent variables must be written. They need to write the variables along with the axes with proper units. Error number 5. For reason-based questions, it must be answered in 2 points, cause and consequences. Though these questions carry 1 mark each, 2 key points are expected from the students. Most of the time, the students write only 1 point. Students need to write both the cause and the consequences for a reason-based questions. The students are also required to take care of the word limit of the question. If the question is of 1 mark, then the answer should be to the point about whatever is asked in the question. For example, if only definitions are asked, then there is no need to give examples. If 2 consequences are asked, then writing of only 2 consequences are required. If 1 example is asked, then it is better not to give 2 examples. Example of error in reason-based question. This question taken from CBSE Board paper 2019. In this question, many students wrote the reasons wrongly as they got confused with the concepts. The concept of dimerization, osmosis, etc. seems to be unclear to some students. Common errors committed in inorganic chemistry. Error number 1. While representing the structure of a substance, students make certain mistakes like they forget to draw the proper structure with all the elements, bonds and representing the lone pair of electrons. If the questions are asked related to the shape or geometry or hybridization or drawing of a molecule, students need to just draw and need not write anything. When question specifies to mention about, then it should be done properly. Usually the students only draw the structures and do not write its shape or geometry or hybridization. Examples of improper drawing of inorganic structures. Most of the candidates did not mention about the two lone pair of electrons in xenon. Many of them forget to represent the lone pairs in transposition to each other. Some candidates wrote tetrahedral geometry and sp3 hybridization in place of square planar and sp3d2 hybridization in this question, where it was asked to draw the structure of xenon tetrafluoride molecule and to state the hybridization of the central atom and the geometry of the molecule. Error number 2. While writing the equation of a chemical reaction, students tend to make mistakes as writing of unbalanced chemical equations and not mentioning the physical state of reactants and products and conditions above the arrowhead. Writing of the equations when asked about the observation of a reaction. Examples of writing unbalanced equations. Here in this question, many students wrote incorrect or unbalanced equation. Error number 3. In reason-based question. As addressed in the physical chemistry, students need to answer the consequences for the reason-based questions based on the inorganic chemistry also. Some students forget to give the cause of a phenomenon when asked to reason for it. If the consequences is due to phenomenon such as lanthanide contraction or inert pair effect, these terms must be mentioned and highlighted. Error number 4. Principle involved in a process. Students often write the process or steps involved but do not mention about the principle behind the process. Examples of writing incorrect answers for reason-based questions. In the question of why interhalogen compounds are more reactive than related elemental halogens, the point that XX bond is weaker than XX bond was not mentioned by many candidates. Instead, they wrote that interhalogen compounds form hydrogen bonds. In the question, why sulfur exhibits tendency for catenation but oxygen does not, most of the candidates wrote incorrect reasons like down the group catenation property increases instead of writing that SS bond is stronger than OO bond. On being slowly passed through water, phosphine forms bubbles but ammonia dissolves. Most of the candidates did not mention that intermolecular hydrogen bonding in ammonia is responsible for higher solubility of ammonia in water. Error number 5. Confusion in concepts. Students commit error as they get confused in concepts. For example, in the solid state chapter, students get confused in isomerism of coordination compounds, nomenclature of coordination compounds, non-stoichiometry and stoichiometric defects, distinguishing different types of magnetic properties, etc. Example of confusion in concepts. This question, sourced from board paper of 2020, the question was asked that using crystal field theory to write the electronic configuration of iron ion and also predict its magnetic behavior and also to write the IUPAC name of the coordination complex. Here, many students wrote the nomenclature wrong. Also, some students got confused with the magnetic properties and geometry of the complex compounds. Error number 6. In a numerical based question, students make similar types of mistakes as addressed in the physical chemistry, like writing of working formula wrongly, incorrect posting of data or substituting values in the working formula, imperfect numerical value, and use of proper units, etc. Examples of error committed in solving numerical. In this question, to identify the type of unit crystal if the edge length density and atomic weight is given, the values of Z, that is the number of atoms, was calculated correctly by most of the students, but they did not write the type of the unit cell. Common errors committed in organic chemistry. Error number 1. Use of incorrect IUPAC nomenclature of the organic compounds. Students commonly make mistakes in writing the suffixes. For instance, they mistakenly write AL suffix instead of OL, or their handwriting appears confusing between AL and OL. Another mistake made in identifying the substituted alkyl group. Some students erroneously mark the number of carbon atoms wrongly. Examples of error committed in writing the correct IUPAC names and products. In this question, taken from CBSE board paper of 2019, many students either wrote the IUPAC name incorrectly or wrongly identified the name reaction. Error number 2. Use of incorrect structures of organic compounds. Pentavalent carbon. Drawing of pentavalent carbon, that is carbon with 5 bonds, is one such mistake that does not happen out of ignorance but merely out of carelessness. Secondly, not counting the number of carbon atoms. The second really big mistake that the students make is not counting the number of carbons in the organic chemical reactions. For example, the student has written a resulting compound that has one carbon less than the original number of carbons in the left hand side of the reaction. Error number 3. Writing of wrong equation on name reaction. Answer must correspond to the question, and the mistake do happen here due to conceptual misunderstanding. The students also need to check whether name or structures or formula is asked for in the equation. Error number 4. Writing of wrong conversions. Reagents involved in each step must be shown. For this, enough practice is required, and for that we all know as chemistry teachers. Students must be asked to draw mind maps of their own so that they memorize it properly. Examples of error in writing of correct organic conversions. In this type of questions or conversions, students commit error by not writing the reaction conditions, that is, dry ether and heat. Most students did not mention the reagent peroxide according to anti-Markovnikov's rule. A number of candidates were not able to write the complete balance equations. The condition for the reaction was also not given in several cases. Error number 5. Writing of wrong reaction mechanism. Another mistake lies in not mentioning and highlighting all the steps. For example, arrows showing the electron transfer must be shown. Also, the type of reactions involved in the mechanism must be written. Example, nucleophilic substitution. Error number 6. In reason-based questions, these type of questions must be answered to the point, as in case of organic chemistry. Examples of mistakes committed in reason-based questions. In this question, to state the reason why ethylamine is more soluble in water, aniline is not, and aliphatic amines are stronger bases than aromatic amines. Many candidates did not mention the formation of hydrogen bond, and those who wrote about hydrogen bond did not compare with aniline. In aliphatic amines, the alkyl group shows plus I effect. This was not mentioned by many candidates. In aromatic amines, the resonance effect was not mentioned by some candidates. So, these are some of the common errors committed in chemistry by the students. Please like, comment and share this video. Subscribe to the channel Partha's World for more videos.